want to start with one that I thought was very interesting for me. It was around a banking fraud where somebody had compromised their bank account and money was stolen. But and you ruled actually in favor of the consumer here, but before we get into this particular case, I am getting so many of these cases coming to me where somebody has, for example, I actually wrote a piece on it recently. He unknowingly downloaded malware onto his app, onto his phone. They were able to access his banking app and they cleaned it out. What is generally the view of the Ombud in a case where a consumer has compromised their banking details or allowed a virus, for example, like that onto their phones?
I think the first step in answering that question, Maya, is to understand that the relationship between the bank and the customer is one that sits in contract. So when we're looking at liability, we will look for any negligence or wrongdoing on the part of the complainant firstly in negligent in the sense that you downloaded malware or your device was not updated with the latest software, or you knowingly or unknowingly compromised your confidential banking information. So in instances where on the evidence, we can make a finding on a balance of probabilities that there was a compromise on the part of the consumer or the banking customer, then the general position is that liability will sit with the customer. However, having said that, I think it's important to understand that the banks also have obligations and each case is assessed on its own merits. So on the side of the bank, in terms of that contract, they have an obligation to ensure that they provide safe and reliable banking services, that they are able to provide, that they have proper fraud detection and prevention systems in place, that they have processes in place, that they are able to quickly respond to fraud and stop that accounts and mitigate the losses. So in answering your question, I think it's important to understand there's two legs of the investigation. The first leg would be, where did the compromise happen that allowed the person to gain unauthorized access to your account? If we find, there's a compromise on part of the customer, then that will resolve the merits part of it. Then the second leg of the investigation is to look at what time did the customer report the fraud to the bank? Did the bank systems flag this account? If not, why? Did the bank stop the account within reasonable time? Reasonable time often depends on the specific facts of the case. And interestingly enough, most of our findings in favor of the complainant in the digital fraud space happens in the mitigation leg of the investigation, where we find that the bank could have done more to stop those accounts or could have done more in terms of their response to the flagging, or following the money. Because remember, as you know, Maya, it's no longer just being deposited into one account. That money goes through quite a few accounts through different banks. So I think in answering that question, there's obligations on both parties. And depending on the specific facts of the matter, sometimes we actually in the mitigation space make a recommendation that the bank has to refund in full because of the failure to respond timelessly.
And, I've seen those judgments, which is very, very interesting. I think I saw one about 2 months ago, exactly in that case, when you went in, because you can go and call for those timestamps. You can go and call for all of that information. You have that authority.
Yes.
And then you can say, well, actually, we don't feel you acted quickly enough. But where the bank has acted as soon as possible, but the money has already left because they were notified after the money had moved through various accounts, it gets a little bit more, it gets tricky. And I just think it's going to be a continuous issue we have because fraud is just prevalent, especially on the banking apps.
Absolutely.
So I think this is going to be a space that, certainly wearing my consumer hat, it is about education. It is about, speaking to the banks about how much more they can protect vulnerable, especially vulnerable consumers. This particular case I was dealing with was a pensioner.
Yes.
I look at my mom; she's very vulnerable to these attacks. So, but anyway, a conversation you are going to be having ongoing, I think.